Okay, this is the Super Bowl edition of Ask a Special Education Attorney, and I am decked out in my Chiefs gear. Not because I'm necessarily a Kansas City Chiefs fan, but I am definitely a Patrick Mahomes fan, being that I'm a Texas Tech guy. Okay? Now, we're in a house divided because my wife loves San Francisco, has always loved San Francisco, and has poisoned some of my sons and my daughter with Niner fever. I have one son that sided with me, thank goodness. So we're all decked out in our, it's either San Francisco or Kansas City stuff. So go Chiefs or go Mahomes. Okay. So, third grader, level 2 ASD, recently diagnosed with dyslexia, ADHD. Regarding dyslexia, what service should I be making sure to be incorporated in his IEP when you meet in 2 weeks? And, you know, you asked this question a few weeks ago, and I appreciate your patience. This is the one thing, and there might be some people disagree with me on this, but oh well. Look, if your child has autism, then I'm not convinced that there is a necessity for a separate dyslexia diagnosis, being that so many kids with ASD have many of the same markers that dyslexia would have anyway. All right? And I'm talking about, but is it dyslexia? Don't know. You know, in my world, in what I do, what I happen to see is that it's autism. Now, how do we attack it? In a very similar manner, but at the same time, it's not dyslexia because there's so many other things as far as components with the ASD that you don't want to diminish, and that you want to make sure that you're addressing along with some of those markers that somebody's calling dyslexia. And I am going to say this again. You want to keep it as simple as possible for your IEP team. If you go in there and say, well, my child has ADHD, ODD, ACDC, Motley Crue, some rare genetic disorder, doc, and if you go in there with too much stuff, guys, then it's not necessarily that it's going to hamstring you as much as it's going to hamstring the team. And what you want to do is keep it as simple as possible in the areas that we know are peer reviewed and scientifically based for, let's say, the primary diagnosis. Now, the reason that is because we already have these complexity issues, even with the simple stuff when it comes to the IEP team and putting together good goals and good services and accommodations and supplementary aids and services that wrap around your child, so your child's making tangible progress toward their goals. You add too many things, then what ends up happening is that you're doing a lot of things okay or poorly, instead of focusing what you're working on and hyper focusing on what that is and doing that very well. All right. And that's why I keep telling parents, keep it simple. So if your child has ASD, then the reading issues that your child's having, if you've had prior psychological evaluations, and if you've had language evaluations that include pragmatic communication, which is social communication, if you've had those evaluations done, then any logical person would be able to draw that correlation between the achievement scores with regards to the deficits in, let's say, written expression or reading comprehension, and then the deficits in the language, which is going to be a natural sort of area of deficit for ASD anyway. Even if you think your child can communicate very well, there's going to be deficit markers because that's sort of a natural inclusion for autism. Those things happen to also exist in the world of dyslexia in many, many, many children. But at the same time, your child has a diagnosis of autism, and that was the primary diagnosis. And so how do we address the reading? Well, in tandem, the same way we similarly would, not necessarily the same way. So sometimes I would keep some of this stuff. I wouldn't necessarily bring it up to the IEP team unless you absolutely had to, if the markers are already there for the autism to justify the inclusion of services specific to addressing reading comprehension, written expression, and language deficits. And then at that point, you don't need to bring up that other piece, because you're already building an IEP based upon those deficits and the need. Now, what would I would get evaluations done if you haven't, in the area of language, in the area of include pragmatic communication, social communication, and then make sure that you have a very good reading and a math evaluation, different from what the broad overview that the school does. I would go in and get some specifics, which you probably have, which is good. And then you would need to identify a peer-reviewed, scientifically based reading program that incorporates both language with whatever the deficits are in the reading side, because you need to be able to merge those together so that we're really working on your child's ability to visualize. There's got to be that cross connection between those deficit areas, and a lot of schools just are not up to snuff on that. And I know which school district you're in, and we've had issues there. They can do it, but they're not necessarily going to know what they need to put into place to make that happen. They may shake their head and they may tell you that they have these people, and they may, the song and dance it. That's fine. The unfortunate thing in the school district that you live in is that many parents will go out and they will use their resources, because there's a lot of people in your area that have supplemental resources, to go out and get their own private therapy for their child. And if they do, then that means that the school isn't having to do it. And if the school isn't having to do it, then that's the same as atrophy. How in the heck is your school system supposed to be flexing its muscles and working and having a fine-tuned program if the parents are supplementing what the school should be providing through a free and appropriate public education? So yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done, but it's just the whole thing of, do you want the school to do it, or your school can do it though. They can. It's just putting those pieces together and knowing how to do it. The behavioral side is going to be a big one, and hopefully they have a good behavioral plan in place. But did they do the behavioral plan, and did they do the FBA themselves, or did you have an outside agency come in and do it, other than the Learning Tree? I wouldn't use them, but somebody else, like a Milestones, or a Hands, or there's a list there in the Birmingham area. There's also some psychologists in your area that I feel would be more than capable of doing FBAs in your area. That's just sort of my question. Make sure that you have that, because you don't want to have the behavioral component impeding or clouding what you're able to do with regards to the reading. That's sort of the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision, is that they weren't addressing the behavior, therefore the behavior ended up being an impediment to the goal accomplishment in the academic areas. So it's all wraparound services. And give me an update. Let me know how that meeting went, and hopefully you got it all worked out and everything's in place. But there is no need to have an additional diagnosis inserted into your plan. It's already there through the ASD, and you can put together a great IEP without having to add the dyslexia component to it.